Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast in which Craig Touch, myself, Roland Hume, chat to some of the interesting figures and leading lights of writing and self-publishing that we have the opportunity to speak to. And today I'm delighted to have a very, very special guest, a man not known necessarily for anything to do with self-publishing, but writing, and a very, very long and distinguished publishing career, and a musician and a theatre man. He's a true Renaissance man, Raymond Benson. Raymond, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, hello. Good to see you.
And you've been in a lot of places recently. I've seen you popping up on podcasts everywhere.
Yeah, I know. For some reason, I'm popular again.
Well, we are very, very grateful for you joining us. Of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing great. Thanks, Roland, and welcome to the show, Raymond. I know you've had a long career doing all sorts of interesting things. According to Roland, you started in with video games, and
Actually, no, I started in theater.
Theater. Okay. Well, I meant your writing careers.
Oh yeah.
Well, maybe you're writing
in theater.
Yeah, maybe you're writing with theater. Writing for video games, I guess, and then writing for the Bond family. For Ian Fleming's family to continue on the series, right? Uh-huh. And then you've gone on and written your own books aside from Bond. And what one of the things we want to really talk about today, focus on, I mean, we'll sort of get into your history too, and what led into where you are today. But, the idea of structure and the idea of, building your story, structuring your story in a way that, brings readers, chapter to chapter, keeps them flipping the pages, keeps them always wanting to continue, not put the book down, right? Because that's how you write a successful book is people just don't want to stop reading. If people read your book and then in the morning they're really tired because they couldn't close it and go to sleep, I think that you've done a good job, right? And apparently you're very good at that.
I have a copy of your latest book here, The Mad Murders of Marigold Way. And I remember when I picked this up, I read so many books by so many different authors, and I just had such a good time reading it. It was so enjoyable, and the end was so satisfying. You almost felt like you needed a cigarette or something.
Well, I'm glad. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, okay. I know a lot of thriller writers and mystery writers because I belong to all these organizations like International Thriller Writers and Mystery Writers of America and the International Association of Media Tie-In Writers and all that kind of stuff. So, we all talk shop and we all have panels and stuff. And basically, we've all come to the conclusion that you're either a plotter or a pantser. A plotter plans ahead and either does an outline or does a lot of plotting of the story beforehand, and a pantser writes by the seat of their pants. They just sit down and start writing. Like Stephen King is one of the most famous pantsers of all time. He can just regurgitate a novel, just sit down and in his basement or wherever he writes and does it, and that's great. I mean, there's no wrong way to do it, and there's no right way, there's no wrong way. It's whatever works for you. It's whatever works, your method. I find personally that if you're going to write a mystery or a thriller, it's got to have a good plot. It's got to have a twisty, turny plot that is not only exciting and has a lot of red herrings and paths that could go different ways and keep the reader guessing. I think you have to plan it out. For me, I have to know what the ending is before I even start writing. I want to know what I'm working toward. And that way it's easier to plant clues and also redirect the reader too when you need to. If you're just, for me, speaking personally, if I was trying to write a mystery or thriller by the seat of my pants, I would get lost and write myself into a corner, or, I would mess up, and I've tried it. I have tried writing by the seat of my pants. I just can't do it. It was a disaster.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've talked a lot about the pantser and plotter, sort of, whether you're in this camp or that camp, and I am totally with you. I'm more of a plotter, and I feel the same way. Even without thrillers and mysteries, I always kind of need to know where it's going. Otherwise, I would write myself into a corner, and I would have to do so much more rewriting because I'd come to something and then be like, oh, I should have maybe set that up earlier, and then I'd have to go back and do that. So to me, I completely agree.
Exactly. So when I let's take Bond, because that's the easiest way to show examples. When I was writing James Bond, I already had my main character that was given to me. So the trick was coming up with a good plot and a good villain. And what was the villain's plot? What's something unique and new that hasn't been done before? Or if it has been done before, they've all been done before. But what interesting new twist and take on it can you make? I was tasked with writing Bond novels set in contemporary times, which when I was writing was the late 90s, early 2000s. So at that time, I would take basically a world map and pinpoint what locations that Britain would be concerned about. What were the hot spots, and why were they hot spots? So, for example, my first novel, 0-10, I knew that it would be, if it was published, it would be published in 1997. What big hotspot event was Britain concerned with in 1997? That was the handover of Hong Kong. So I thought, well, that's a great, milieu for a story, but I knew nothing about it. Why did Britain even own Hong Kong in the first place, and why were they giving it back? So I had to do a little preliminary research and learn about, the Opium Wars of the 1800s. And I learned that there was a war between Britain and China, and Britain won the war. And in the treaty, they got the land mass known as Hong Kong. But when they were writing up the treaty in London somewhere, some fool kind of put in there, "We'll give it back to you in 100 years." So they honored the treaty. But here you had, 100 years of Chinese people and other people living under a democratic rule of Britain. And then suddenly now they're going to be under a communist rule. I bet a lot of people were not very happy about that. And I bet that there were British businessmen who had British businesses in Hong Kong that weren't happy about that either. And so suddenly my villain came to life. It was like, okay, that's it. A British businessman who does not want Hong Kong handed over to China. He's my villain. And so what's he going to try to do about it? Well, he's going to try to disrupt the handover. In fact, he's so, demented that he's going to cause a war between Britain and China again. So there we have it. There's a perfect Bond plot, a Bond villain plot. And
it's so perfect that they made a movie about it a few years after you wrote the book about something completely different with Tomorrow Never Dies.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, in a way. Yeah. And, I actually found out much later that Eon had been exploring the Hong Kong issue for the movie after GoldenEye. I did not know that at the time, and I don't even think Ian Fleming Publications knew that at the time, but we did learn about it later. So who knows? I don't know why they didn't go through with that, and I have no idea. I'm not even going to go there. So anyway. So once I decided that and kind of my idea was approved, then I had to start doing more research and figuring out, with Bond, a lot of the locations inform the story. So I started picking areas of Hong Kong and China and Macau that might be interesting for a location, and then thinking about what could happen there, and then I started just developing the story. And so I wrote what I call an outline. It's really a prose treatment, and it's broken out in block paragraphs. Each paragraph represents a chapter. What happens in that chapter that propels the story? You know, I don't get into character or dialogue. It's just like, what information do you get in that one little paragraph, that one chapter, that's going to move the story forward? And that's where I work out all the twists and turns and the obstacles, and basically the entire, it's like, you know, Alfred Hitchcock, when he made a movie, he would do storyboards, right?
Yeah.
You know, and the story, he would direct the entire movie in storyboards before he even walked onto the set. And he's famous for saying that after he had done that in his head and on paper, then going to shoot the movie was boring because he'd already done all the work. He'd already done all the creativity. And that's kind of how I feel. The hardest part for me is writing that outline. That's where all the work goes into it. All the creativity, all the angst, the hair pulling and everything is in that 20-page single-spaced outline.
It's something you said about that, about each, you have a paragraph for each chapter and it tells you the information that moves the story forward. I remember when I read this, which of course has nothing to do with Bond, that was exactly what happened. Every single chapter, you finished it and you're like, now I know something new that informs me differently about the context of the story. And that's, I guess, where you get the twists with it.
Yeah. Well, I do an outline. I've done outlines for all my books, including that one. So that's, that's how I work. And then, once the outline is done and I'm happy with it, then with Bond, I would actually travel to the locations and walk in Bond's footsteps and visit all these places so that I could, accurately write about it. And so, back then, you didn't really have Google Maps where you can take the little guy on street. So you had to actually go. So I did that. And that, that also could change things. I'd get to a place and I'd go, oh, wait, well, this doesn't quite work out exactly how I imagined it. So I'd kind of refashion it and refigure it a little bit if I had to. So so I would do that. I'd come back home with a lot of notes and pictures, and then I'd start to write. And the way I write is like Ian Fleming. I want to do the entire first draft all in one go without looking back at what I'd written. And I think that helps establish a pace. It gives a momentum to the drive of the book. Because if you write a chapter and then you stop and then you go back and you start rewriting it and then you start revising it and then you think about it and then you go back to it, man, you're going to lose your train. You're going to, the train's not going to keep going. It's not going to make it to the destination, So I like to just write a scene a day. Whether a scene is a whole chapter or not, it depends on the scene. As long as it has a beginning and an end, I want to write a scene a day, and then the next day just continue. Next scene, and just add it all up. And the writing, then if you're following your outline, it's like a blueprint. It's a map.
Yeah.
You get up in the morning and you're ready to write, and you look at your outline. You go, okay, what am I writing today? Oh yeah, it's this little bit here, this chapter, and I know I have to get that information into the story, and boom, I start going. So the writing part is relatively easy. I mean, it's tedious. It takes a while, but you can be creative as you're writing. You got to do the dialogue, you got to have characters, and you got to be descriptive and all that stuff, and that's where the writing comes in. But you don't have to think about the plot. It's already done.
Yeah, the hard stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Now there's tricks for making it suspenseful. There are tricks. It kind of, there's a difference between, we always argue about what's the difference between a mystery and a thriller. Mysteries are more like, whodunits. You want to figure out a puzzle. You want to figure out why something happened or who did something, et cetera. It's solving a puzzle. A thriller is more of a situation in which the big question is, are we going to get out of this alive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a great way of defining the two. I'd never really heard it defined quite as simply as that.
Right. You know, a thriller might have a time. A good thriller might have. This is one of those tricks. It's the ticking bomb scenario.
That was another Hitchcock thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and you know it can be Bond too. You know something's going to happen. There, you know the missile's going to shoot off a laser at Washington or something. At such and such day at such and such hour, and so you structure your novel in hours and days, 0 - 10, to that you have a deadline. And so that gets you the suspense going. Are they going to make the deadline? So that's a big one. There's the intruder threat, where this can be literal, like you're in a house and you're being attacked by zombies, and how are you going to escape? Or you're in a submarine and it's disabled and you're underwater. How are you going to survive or escape? It's the same kind of thing. The trapped room scenario.
Yeah.
I always try to end each chapter with a cliffhanger. That's what helps get the reader to keep going. At night, you finish a chapter and you go, oh shit, I want to go to the next chapter. So you kind of leave it with a revelation at the end of the chapter, or something big happened. It's good to start the novel. The beginnings are very, very important. Not only to get the story rolling, but also to interest an editor at a publisher. These editors, they'll read the first page of your novel, and if you haven't grabbed them in the first page, forget it. They'll reject you. They look for every excuse to reject a novel because they can only publish so many books.
Yeah,
and they get hundreds of submissions. So if that first paragraph, if that first page does not, go, oh, well, this is kind of cool, then you're lost. So like the Bond movies that have a pre-credit sequence, I like to start with a pre-credit sequence. You drop the reader right in the middle of something that's already happening. And it gets their attention. It gets the reader's attention. It can't be obtuse. I mean, they've got to kind of know pretty quickly where they are, what's going on, who's involved, and so on. But let's take an opening sentence like in my the Black Stiletto series.
Yes.
The very first line of the very first book is, my mother was known as the mass vigilante known as the Black Stiletto.
And that kind of immediately leads. There are so many questions you automatically have as a reader just from that statement.
Right. I have my first non-Bond novel was called Evil Hours. The opening sentence, for some reason, I've written a lot about children, grown children and their mothers, and some secret with their mothers. I don't know why, because my mother had no secrets. But Evil Hours, the opening sentence is, my mother was murdered when I was 4 years old, or something like that.
You're one in this. It's Friends. Oh, what was it? Friends. This is a little tale about some murders. And immediately, okay. Yeah.
So if you can come up with a sentence like that can just kind of go, ooh. Let's read the next sentence.
I think this is. Oh, go ahead, Craig.
No.
I was just gonna say, like, I sometimes I think one technique some writers do, I feel like a lot of writers, they might be in a situation where, like, well, my story doesn't really start off that interesting or whatever, so I don't know, I can't really do that or whatever. But I think what a lot of authors do, or what I've seen done, is in the case where they really don't have a great place to start like that, they kind of start with a almost like a flashback, and then they sort of move forward, and then you're kind of like or you switch back in time, and then you're like, how did you get what happened there?
Yeah,
how did you get there?
I do that too. I mean, I've done that a lot, where the opening chapter is something that takes place in the past. Fleming did that a lot,
Right.
Or it's something that takes place in the future. It's something that's
Right.
later on in the book, and you get a glimpse of it there at the beginning, and then the next chapter is going back in time to the beginning of the story to catch up with that opening chapter.
Right. And then you can go to things that are maybe a little more dry, because you've sort of put that thing in their head, and it's that suspense, you've set it up, and now they're like thinking, well, wait a second, how are we going to get there? And then they're going to want to power through to try to figure it out, even if you have to get to some backstory that isn't as exciting as what it's leading to.
Right. Now, another thing in the plot, another trick that can generate suspense is let the reader know something, but not your characters. So the reader is constantly going, "You idiots! Can't you see this is right in front of you? This is, why do you not know this? And you're dying for them to find out what you know. That's one way. Or you can do the opposite. You somehow indicate that a character knows something that the reader doesn't know, and the character is not saying, he's not revealing it. And somewhere down the line, he's going to reveal it. And
I know that like his behavior might be out of like character for what you expect him to do, because he knows something you don't, and therefore you want to figure out why he's doing that.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, I think you have to sort of be careful on that first one. I've seen it done poorly, in the sense a lot of times in movies or TV shows, maybe, where you're kind of like, you almost have to make the characters really dumb to not understand what's going on, or you at least kind of feel like they are. You're like, how can they not see that? Like, they should. It's almost like takes you out of the realm of disbelief if you don't do it right, because you're kind of like, it's really, really obvious, but they keep missing it, and that I find sometimes frustrating. Right? It's like, okay, come on, like, you couldn't have your story if they didn't ignore this completely obvious thing, right? So you have to kind of like be careful about how you do that.
Yeah, I agree. Anyway, once I've finished writing the first draft, that's when I go back and start revising. And by then it's 3 or 4 months later from when I started writing the book. And so when I start reading that first chapter again, it's very fresh. It's like, oh my gosh, did I write this? And then it's like fun. For me, that's the most fun part of the entire process, is going back and reading it again after you've written it, and starting to revise that, and the traveling to the research. That was fun too, but it was a lot of work.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
But yeah, so then you do that, and maybe a couple times, and then it's always good to have beta readers that you trust, who will tell you the truth, and read your book before you give it to your agent or somebody. And then you might do another draft based on that, what they tell you. And then you might have to do another draft once the agent reads it, and maybe again once an editor maybe takes it, but then wants changes or something. Who knows? It's maddening.
But it's really interesting to hear the way you describe this process, because it's almost like it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle. You're putting the big pieces in with the things, and then the smaller pieces, and the smaller pieces, and that's the final picture. But the big pieces of the structure, like you were talking about 0 - 10, coming up with the plot of this evil, dastardly person. When it comes to like characters, because a lot of story has to be character driven, because characters have to do must be motivated to do things that drive it along. How do you like combine the plot, which is what you need to happen, with the characters who are the people who need to make it happen for you?
Well, see, that's where my theater training comes in.
Ah.
I studied directing, and I got a degree in directing theater. And we had a professor at the University of Texas at Austin. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie called The Paper Chase that had John Houseman in it. It's from 1973. He was a law professor. John Houseman won an Oscar for supporting actor for it. He was this really tough, mean professor that was brilliant, and the students were all in awe of him and scared of him and all this stuff. But he was a great teacher. Well, my directing professor was just like that, and everybody was in awe of him and everybody was scared of him. And he wrote the most widely used directing textbook in the United States at the time. So he was a big deal. Pretty much the entire department revolved around the directing program. So he was very, very big on preparation. And you cannot, direct a play until you've torn that play apart. You have to study that play. You have to write out this, what he called it, preparation. And it was basically like a thesis. You had to go beat by beat throughout the entire play. And, what is the subtext for almost every line of dialogue, and then you had to do character analysis of all the characters in the play, and what are their motivations? What are they trying to do? What are they at the beginning of the play, and what are they at the end of the play? How do they change if they do? That kind of stuff. And you got to know all this stuff. And he also had you block out the play on paper as part of the preparation. That's again the storyboard technique.
Yeah. And when you say blocking, that's like where the actors stand.
Where the actors move throughout the play. So you had a ground plan. You had to make a ground plan of the play. And then for every page of the script, you had to show where the characters are going to move and on what line.
It's almost like a coach with a football team.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So I used that whole concept, that whole philosophy in my writing. So, we learned that characters define the action, that at the same time, action defines the characters. And by action, I mean dramatic action. I don't mean fisticuffs. I mean, drama action. Whatever happens in the play comes out of something the character wants, and vice versa. Something that happens in the play can be a character can react upon.
Yeah.
Okay. So for me personally, the characters came about organically from the story. I would create this plot, and I knew what characters I wanted in the thing and what characters are doing what. And as I was writing the story, it would just happen intuitively. For me, it also helped in a lot of cases if I cast it in my head.
Oh, that's interesting.
I wouldn't convey in the writing who I was thinking about. But in my head, if I could hear that actor's voice, or in my mind's eye, see that actor in that role, it helped me write that character.
Yeah.
For example, 0 - 10.
Yep.
The character of Guy Thackeray, the villain.
Yes.
Jeremy Irons.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And that was
Very
1990s Jeremy Irons.
1990s. Yeah, 1990s. Yeah.
Oh, what a brilliant choice.
Yeah.
He was so good in like Die Hard 3 as a bad guy. You can see it.
And then the triad leader.
Yeah.
That's in it. Chow Yun-fat.
Oh, that's a name I've not heard in a long, long time. But he was huge in the 90s.
Yes. Yeah. With 0 - 10, I was also influenced a lot by Jackie Chan movies and John Woo movies because I was watching them a lot in the 90s. You know, I was really into the Hong Kong cinema.
That was when it kind of came over, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was big in the 90s. That was that's when it really became popular. So I was into it. And then 0-10 happened, and I'm going, oh wow, I can channel that into this novel, you know. So
that's really interesting. It's kind of interesting as well, because it seems like, you know, there are people who write books that are very cognitive, I guess, and others that write books you can almost like see, that almost like movies. And I guess Ian Fleming had examples of both, but yours are like books you read that you can. I think I even sent you a message when I was reading the Mad Murders, and I was just like, I could imagine this as something you're watching. And like, and that was the same for all your books.
Yeah, well, I think I do write very cinematically. I'm not a very literary writer. I'm very much a kind of nuts and bolts commercial thriller writer. You know, I think my books are very accessible. That's, you know, they don't get bogged down in literary stuff. Not that that's bad. It's just that's not my style. You know,
I think that's the genre, right? Thrillers tend to be, they're more visual things, you know, they're chasing and
they need to be,
they're blowing up.
Short sentences, you know, no James Joyce style 1-sentence paragraphs, you know.
I mean, I like a good literary book every so often, but that's like having like I don't know, a vegan smoothie, and sometimes you just want steak and chips.
Yeah. So that's basically it. And I always say to beginning writers, you know, read a lot. You know, read the kind of books you want to write. If you want to be a thriller writer, read a lot of thrillers and see how they do it. And you do soak in by osmosis technique. I think that's very important. And what else?
I was going to ask, you've already mentioned how your theatre background definitely colored the way you wrote books. Did your experience writing video games and writing role-playing games help with that? Because I always wonder if those have to be so structured, and it's the structure that's so strong in your books. Maybe it's that training that kind of like excels in how you write.
Well, interestingly, I used a lot of my theater training in writing and doing the video games. Because you know, my games were story-based role-playing games where you're a character in a story trying to solve the story, you know. So I used all the techniques that I learned in directing in those games. And yeah, you had to come up with, you know, puzzles and obstacles, but you're still telling a story. And you might just have to go off on tangents and explore the path not taken in a game, because there would be players who do that.
Yeah.
And so it can't just be a dead end. You've got to kind of also create another little subplot over here, and then they realize, oh, this isn't going anywhere, you know, this is just kind of for fun. And so you got
side quests. Yeah,
exactly. A side quest, exactly. So yeah, it did train me to but it also helped hone my fiction writing. I was not a fiction writer before I was doing games, so I did have to write dialogue. I had to create characters, and that's where I kind of honed how to write fiction, was doing these games. So yeah, you know, 0-10 was my first published novel.
Which, I mean, I do find that amazing. I mean, there's the new author Kim Sherwood. Everyone's like, oh, she's only written one book, and they decided it's like, okay, that's fine. But look, Raymond Benson hadn't written any books, and the folks from James Bond were like, will you write the next part? I mean, they must have had quite a lot of faith in what you were able to deliver.
Well, you know, I'd written the James Bond Bedside Companion. That was a nonfiction book. And that was a complete history of Bond and an analysis of all the books and all the movies. And so they knew that I knew the universe very, very well, you know, and they knew I could write because they'd seen that. They didn't know if I could write fiction really, but I had written a first novel, a mystery novel. It was while I was doing the computer game stuff. And I let the head of Ian Fleming publications. At the time, it was called Glidrose. His name was Peter Jansen Smith. He was Ian Fleming's literary agent, and he controlled all the literary business at the time. I let him read the book. I asked him to read it, and would he read it and give me comments, and he did. He gave me some good comments. I think we both agreed that it was the proverbial first novel you stick in a drawer and it stays there forever. But he did see that I could start a novel and, more importantly, finish it. And, so many people start novels and they never finish it.
Yeah.
And then he also saw that I was doing all these computer games, and some of them were award-winning games, story-based games. So he took a chance. It was a gamble. I know it was. I'm sure a lot of people probably told him, "Are you crazy? You're gonna ask this guy to write a Bond novel?"
But then the people that are telling him that are having to pick up a phone and say it. They're not like a billion people on the internet questioning every decision you make. I think it's harder now to make those kind of big
yes, that's
grand
true.
Take those chances, right? Because you're going to hear about it from every corner of the internet.
Right.
Whereas back then, you just had to answer to a few people and take a chance. And then if it doesn't work out, maybe they don't even put it out and they can pretend it never happened.
That's right. Because it was total secret. I mean, and I did have to audition a little bit. I had to come up with the outline on spec, and that had to be approved by not only the Fleming people, but also the British publisher and the American publisher. And once they gave the green light to the plot, the story, then I had to write the first 4 chapters on spec just to show them.
Oh, wow. So you could have done all that and then you could have been like, nah, we'll go with someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was the same approval process. They all had to approve it. And once that was done, then they saw, okay, let's let him do it.
And what a bloody good job you did as well. I mean, it's...
Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
I mean, poor Craig has to listen to me go on about James Bond all the time. He's extremely patient. But one of the things is, people are always asking me, where do you begin with a continuation novel? Should we read the John Gardner ones? And I'm kind of like, no, you should start off really with the Raymond Benson ones, because you brought Bond into legitimacy as a character. They weren't just like hokey novels being sent out for the guys who like the Roger Moore books. It's like they were legitimate thrillers, and they got and every single one is a cracker. And I think that's what elevated James Bond to the point where they were like, let's bring in Sebastian Fawkes, let's get Jeffrey Deaver, let's get these other people. You reinvigorated the entire franchise.
Well, I appreciate that. That's nice to hear.
Craig.
So I wanted to go back a little bit to something you were talking about quite a while ago. In terms of your process and writing the chapters, in a block paragraph. Because I do a similar thing, but I wonder if I have a feeling that you're a lot more disciplined. I found that when I did that, although I would do it probably maybe not as much detail, but quite a lot of detail as well. I'd plan out every chapter. When I get to the writing part of it, things diverge sometimes. And then I end up having to go back to my outline and sort of change a bunch of stuff going forward, because I made a decision while I was writing that just, changed how, future chapters were going to go. I couldn't stick directly to that. Do you do that, or do you pretty much stay very close to your outline?
I always know going into it that I'm not married to the outline. That if I have some kind of wild idea in the middle of the writing, and I want to change something, I will. And I might have to go and revise the outline a little bit if it changes it drastically. There's one case where it really did change, and that was my novel called Face Blind, which was my second non-Bond novel. In the middle of the story, I'm writing. I've already done the outline. I'm writing the book now. In the middle of the book, I suddenly got the idea to kill off a character that stayed alive in the original outline.
Right.
And I just kind of went, oh wow, this would be a really great twist if I kill this guy. How will that affect the rest of the story? And I had to think about it, and go back to the outline and kind of look at it and go, okay, if he's not in this set part, not in this part, not in this part, how does that affect the story? And I worked it out, and I thought, I'm going to do it, so it can happen, but I still, use the outline. I just had to revise it a little bit.
Just revise. Yeah.
I
think it's tougher probably with thrillers to do that because so many of the things are very, very planned out. Whereas, when I was writing, it was romance. It wasn't that hard to change the plot. But I also found that's why it diverged so much, because my characters would just, it's more character driven. They're all just in the relationships, and you realize that, you're writing something and there's more chemistry or less chemistry or whatever. And that changes sort of a lot of stuff, but it's a lot easier for me to change the outline of a romance than it would be to write a thriller, especially if it was one where I had gone on location and scouted a whole bunch of things. I'd be a lot more reticent to make changes.
Yeah. But Roland, you had said something earlier about how, doing the novel is like a big jigsaw puzzle where you do the big parts first. I kind of look at it as building a novel.
Yeah.
It's the outline is like the blueprints, the ground plan, the foundation, the bones of the building, and then the writing is putting in all the the walls and the rooms and the floors and the ceilings and all that.
I mean, people often say, writing is a craft, not an art, and a writer is a craftsman. As Hemingway said, we're all craftsmen we're all apprentices in a craft that never has a master. But I find it so interesting that the strategicness in which you put things together, and it does appeal to me listening to it. I'm like, maybe that's the way you can get over writer's block and get over not sitting down and wondering what you're going to do.
Yeah, it is. I think it is a craft. I mean, you can be artistic within the craft.
Yeah,
you have to know the craft before you know the art.
Now, do you use any form of pre-planned story structure, like Joseph Campbell's the story circle or Save the Cat? No,
never. It might be intuitive or something that just kind of is in here that I don't even think about, and suddenly it's done and I go, oh well, that's kind of this.
I talk to people about this, and it's like people can't often articulate what makes a story satisfying, but they know a satisfying story when they read it.
Yeah. That's just something I don't know. It's something I said before you started recording, is that I'm not sure how I do certain things. It's some of it is intuitive.
Yeah.
Some of it just comes out of my theater training of dramatic action, of how I think a character would react or do something within the context of the situation. And it just turns out to be right. Could I have done this if I hadn't, directed plays and worked with actors and studied plays? I don't know. But I kind of link it all together.
It makes a lot of sense. And there's something that it's something very refreshing about the sort of way you approach things, the way you articulate things. And maybe that's it. So maybe advice for writers should be, you should go and investigate theatre.
Yeah, I know. Well, there's less money in theater than there is in writing. So.
Oh, Lord. Lord save us. I had a very quick question for you, because we're running out of time, and I'll leave some space for Craig. Just for my own curiosity, you were saying you have these ideas and they pop into you. When you were planning out this one and you started with the end in mind, I won't give any spoilers, but there are these two specific characters who you think of a certain way throughout the entire book, and the end, suddenly that gets completely flipped. And it's at what point were you doing the dishes, walking the dog or something, when you came up with this idea?
Well, it was May 2020.
Yeah.
And
right to the
what
pandemic.
we were going through then. We were all still in lockdown. We were all wearing masks and social distancing and doing really bizarre, absurd things like washing our mail.
Yeah.
And, washing our groceries and just doing crazy stuff because we were so paranoid and freaked out by this virus that we didn't really know anything about. The vaccines were a year away, and it was new, it was scary. And we live in the suburbs. My wife and I would still take walks in the neighborhood, and it was just creepy. I mean, we could see that nobody was out. Every now and then you'd pass somebody, and you'd kind of like, do that. But that's how I got I mean, Marigold Way is really my street. I changed the name and everything. And we had a house next to us that was for sale for months. It was empty all during the pandemic and for some time before the pandemic. And so we kept thinking, it's kind of creepy having this empty house next to us. And so my mind started going, thinking of things that could happen in there, especially, now during the pandemic. And then, I also thought, well, crimes are still going to happen during the pandemic. There's still going to be murders.
Yeah.
And stuff. And then, I'm a big fan of Our Town, the Thornton Wilder play.
Yes.
In fact, I was in it once. In college, I actually acted in it. And I started thinking, what if Thornton Wilder was alive today and he wrote another Our Town only now during the pandemic? What would it be like? That was going through my head. I'm a big Coen Brothers fan. And
movies like Fargo and things like that.
Yeah, and I thought, they do movies, especially their crime movies. They're movies made for smart people, but they're about stupid people. They really are. All their characters are really, really stupid. They do stupid things. But it's done so brilliantly, and they're dark comedies. They're really, even their darkest crime movies has a lot of dark humor in it. And so I started envisioning this story as a Coen Brothers movie filtered through Thornton Wilder's Our Town in today's pandemic setting. That's how it kind of came about. I mean, the main character, Scott, he's stupid. He's a total idiot,
Well, he's a writer.
Exactly.
Well, unfortunately, we are approaching the top of the hour, so we have to wrap things up. Oh, this has been such a delightful conversation, and I think it's going to be really valuable. I think people who are listening to this, I think there is so much they can learn from your approach and what you've shared with it. Craig, do you have any more questions?
No, but I agree. I think that, there's really a lot here to unpack and go through and think about in terms of, how to structure a story and all the planning and how much easier that makes the actual writing process when you have a solid plan. Not to say that, there isn't a place for pantsers, but, I'm personally definitely on the plotter side of it. So for me, at least, this was sort of really very, very, very valuable. So thanks for coming on and sharing.
You bet. I was happy to do it. Thanks for asking me.
And Raymond, where can people find your work?
Well, it's all over Amazon. I mean, a lot of my books are out of print, but they are available as ebooks. Everything is an ebook. So some of the more recent books are still in print.
And some of them are getting reprinted.
Oh yes, Zero Menace 10 is coming out Thursday.
Yes.
Yeah. But anyway, Amazon is certainly the best place to find me. My website is raymondbenson.com, and you can go, see all my books there, and there are links to Amazon from each title and so on.
And there's also other stuff, your music and your movies and yes.
All that. Yeah.
Well, we'll pop a link down below. And if you go down and scroll there, while you're there, make sure you leave a comment for Raymond and tell him how much you appreciated all the wisdom he has shared today. And if you're down there, you might as well hit that like button and hit that subscribe button at the same time. But thank you so much, Raymond, for joining us and sharing all this wisdom. Thank you so much to everyone listening at home. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Fully Booked. So until then, cheerio.
Bye.